Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm bringing you my October reading wrap-up. I can't believe that we're in November already, this year is going so quickly. So let's get straight to it. In October I read 8 books. 6 of these books I borrowed from the library, because you will have seen my library haul video. I had quite a lot of books out from the library. I still do, but there are slightly less now. So I managed to read 6 of my library books. I read 1 book from my book Death Row, finally read one of those books, and you may have seen my book Death Row try chapter video, so that actually was quite helpful for me, and I think I'm going to be doing more of that over the next couple of months to try and help me get through some of those books or actually make a decision about some of those books. I'm also planning a bit of an unhaul for January, post-Christmas unhaul, so you'll have that to look forward to as well. I read 2 books that were non-fiction, and I ticked 2 more countries off my Read Around the World challenge, which were Nigeria and Dominica, so that was good. I read 2 books by male authors and 6 books by female authors. My Goodreads total for the year so far at the end of October is 82 books, which means I completed my Goodreads goal, hooray! With 2.5 months to spare. So I have a bit of a stretch goal. I would really love if I got to 100 books this year, because I don't know if that's something that any other year I would be able to manage. So yeah, so I'm gonna be pushing to try and finish another 18 books this year. Well, I've already read a couple of books this month, but I sort of got into a bit of a reading slump at the start of November, but I seem to be pulling out of it now. So I would just need to read 9 books in November and 9 in December to hit 100 by the end of the year. So that would be really cool if I can manage that. So that's my new target. I'll let you know how I got on with that. Of the books I read, I gave 2 books 5 stars, 3 books 4 stars, and 3 books 3 stars. So quite fairly average month really. But let's talk about the books. As most of the books were library books, I've had to take them back already, so I'll put up pictures of those ones because I don't have the physical copy anymore. The first book that I gave 3 stars to was To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. This was actually, initially I gave it 4 stars and then I sort of did downgrade it to 3 stars. It would be a 3.5. So the way I define between those two, if I want to give it 3.5 stars and I have to pick 3 or 4 stars for it, I usually decide based on, would this be a book that I want to reread? And as much as I enjoyed that book, once I finish the series I don't think I'll reread them. I don't intend to buy them or read them again. Yeah, so that one's ended up as a 3 stars. Nothing wrong with it. I did enjoy the story. I thought it was very clever, the outworking of it. I am going to be carrying on the series. I have the second book out from the library at the moment, I just haven't quite got around to it yet. So I do intend to carry on. I recognise that I'm not really the target audience for those books. If I was reading them 10-15 years ago, I probably would have enjoyed them more. I can see a lot of similarities between myself as a teenager and Lara Jean. I think my biggest disappointment was that I wasn't overly enamoured of either of the love interests. So I'm intrigued to see, I think the next book has a third person that she wrote a letter to coming into it. So I'm intrigued to see how that plays out and yeah, where we go from there. And I'm trying to read them all before I watch the Netflix show, because I'm really looking forward to watching that and seeing how they brought it to life. So yeah, so I've got to read, I am going to carry on that series. But yeah, as I say, very enjoyable book and do recommend it. This is much harder without the books to hold up. The next one I do have though. So the next book I gave 3 stars to was Martyr by Rory Clements. This was one of my Death Row books. So it's the first book that I've actually managed to read from my book Death Row. I'm glad that I read it. It's not one that I'm going to reread. It's not a series it's the first in a series and I'm not going to carry on with the series. But I'm glad that I have read it and now can unhaul it. So it's set in Tudor times in the reign of Elizabeth I. The main character is John Shakespeare, who works for Walsingham, who's Elizabeth's spy captain person. So it's all about intrigue and plots around the Tudor court. There's the villain of the piece is called Topple, and he's trying to uncover a secret society of Catholics. There's scenes of torture in this, which I didn't particularly enjoy. I liked the reference to William Shakespeare, who is supposedly John Shakespeare's brother in the book, and there is one scene featuring William Shakespeare, which is very entertaining. But to me, parts of the plot was a bit far-fetched. So the basic storyline is they think an assassin's coming to kill Sir Francis Drake, and so John Shakespeare's got to try and keep him safe, meanwhile helping or looking for Catholics, but also stopping Topcliffe from getting the Catholics because Topcliffe is too nasty to them, or anyway, yeah, there was sort of bits that felt a bit convenient, and like suddenly the whole story resolved very quickly, and I was just like, really? And again, there was a love interest in there which I didn't quite find that love story believable, and yeah, but it was alright. It was fairly well written, and if you like historical fiction and you like spy intrigue and mystery and stuff, then they're worth giving a try to. For me, it just didn't quite live up, I think, to my expectations. So anyway, so gave that one 3 stars, and I won't be carrying on with that series. The next book I gave 3 stars to was another one I borrowed from the library, which was called Mermaid by Carolyn Turgeon. This is a Little Mermaid retelling. Most of it, I think, remains fairly faithful to the original fairy tale, but not to the Disney version. So it features a character that's not in the Disney version, which is a princess, and the story is told half from her perspective and half from the mermaid's perspective. And I can't think off the top of my head what the character's called. So the basic premise is mermaids have really long lifespans. They're almost entirely separate from the human world underwater, but when every mermaid turns 18, they're allowed to go up to the surface and have a look at what the human world is all about, but they have to try and keep away from the humans and not have any contact with them because it's become too dangerous. So the main mermaid character, really struggling to think of her name, on her 18th birthday witnesses a shipwreck and falls in love instantly with the prince who's on the ship, but she doesn't know he's the prince, and so she rescues him and she takes him to the shore, but he's on the verge of death, and the shore is by a convent, and the princess from the rival northern kingdom is staying at the convent for her own protection because the two kingdoms are at war. She sees the mermaid bring the prince ashore and runs down and rescues him, and she doesn't know he's the prince either of the rival kingdom. He doesn't know she's actually the princess. They meet and have a connection, but then he has to leave, and then afterwards she finds out that he's the prince, and she decides she's going to go on a quest to try and reunite their kingdoms by marrying him. Meanwhile, the mermaid has fallen in love with the prince and decides she wants to be human, so in doing so has to have her tongue cut out, and she becomes human, and she's also in love with her, and then it goes all love triangle-y. I didn't think the execution lived up to my expectations. I read another book by Carolyn Turgeon a couple of years ago called Godmother, which is a Cinderella retelling but from the perspective of the fairy godmother, which was brilliant. It turned the whole story up on its head and had one of my favourite tropes of the unreliable narrator, and I really loved it. This sadly did not live up to Godmother. It was not anywhere near as good. There were just aspects of the story, particularly the tongue cutting out thing. So in the original fairy tale, she does lose her voice, and like in the Disney movie, she has to sacrifice her voice. I'm not sure of how that was worked out, but in this story, she actually has her tongue cut out and put into this potion that she then drinks. However, the way it was described, she was still underwater at this point. And I was talking to my dad about it because I was just like, the whole thing of the tongue being cut out was really taking me out of the story. So there's a scene when she's human, when she's trying to eat, and we were like, oh, she surely would be having real difficulty eating, and would she actually be able to taste the food because she's got no tongue? And I know that not all your sense of taste is within your tongue, apart from mine is because I've got no sense of smell. But I was like, would she be able to taste food? And there's a scene where she's apparently screaming and no sound coming out, but you can still scream if you've got no tongue because that's in your vocal cords, not in your tongue. And it also says she can laugh, which is produced in the same way as screaming. And I was just so distracted by it that it really took me out of the story. And after that, I didn't really enjoy the book anymore because I was just too distracted by that. And also when the scene where the tongue is being cut out underwater, like, surely she would just bleed to death because she was given nothing to stop the bleeding in her mouth. Like, anyway, So, rant over. So this book was not all I hoped it could be, which was disappointing because I love fairy tale retellings and Godmother was so amazing. So if you want to read a really good Cinderella retelling, read Godmother. If you really love Little Mermaid retellings, you might enjoy Mermaid. I don't think I've given too much away of the story. Yeah, let's move on. So on to my 4-star reads. So my first 4-star read of the month was a non-fiction book. It is Shakespeare by Bill Bryson. I was given this for my birthday last year and been meaning to get around to it because I'm a massive Shakespeare fan, and I did start it, I think I started it in June and then just sort of kept putting it down, and so I actually sat down and read all of the rest of it and really loved it. Loved Bill Bryson's take on Shakespeare's life. I was reading this alongside watching Upstart Crow, which I mentioned in my Things I Loved It in October video. So this is a really good introduction to the life of Shakespeare, gives some perspective on some of the different arguments around could Shakespeare have actually written his plays and who are some of the other people that people think might have done and how stupid those theories are. And yeah, really, really enjoyable. If you love Shakespeare, you will enjoy this book. And I can't think of anything else to say to it because we all know who Shakespeare is, and this is just a brief biography of him and written with Bill Bryson's usual wit and humour. So yeah, definitely 4 stars for this one. My next book I gave 4 stars to was Dumplin by Julie Murphy. This is the story of Willowdean, who is a plus-size teenager who has a lot of self-confidence until she starts falling for a boy that she works with, and it makes her question her self-belief, and makes her start to feel bad about herself. So to counteract that, she decides to enter into her town's beauty pageant, which is run by her mum, and hilarity ensues. I really loved the cast of characters in this book. Willowdean has several other misfit friends who will also decide to join in the beauty pageant, and I just thought it was really funny, really comforting read, really diverse, really body positive, and I'm really excited to read the sequel, Pudding, which follows one of the other characters. So I got Dumplin out from the library. Unfortunately, my library doesn't have Pudding at the moment, so I haven't decided yet whether I'm just gonna buy that or whether I'm gonna try and request it as an interlibrary loan, because I'm not really meant to be buying books at the moment, but you have to pay for interlibrary loans, so I'm like, if I'm gonna pay for it, I might as well buy it, but it's all a big confusion thing. But yeah, really highly recommend Dumplin, and I think it's being made into a Netflix movie as well, which is really exciting, and so really looking forward to see that. And my next 4-star read of the month was Wide Sargasso Sea by Rhys. Again, this was one I borrowed from the library. This is essentially written as a prequel to Jane Eyre, although it doesn't specifically name Mr. Rochester in the story. It does refer to him, and it's clear from the other characters' names that that is what it's intended as, and particularly the last section of the book is set in England in Thornfield, is that the name of the... Thornfield Manor? I think that's the name of Mr. Rochester's house in the UK. But the first part of the novel is set in the Caribbean between Jamaica and Dominica. Rhys actually is from Dominica, so I ticked off Dominica for my Read Around the World challenge, and this was really interesting to see the dynamics. So both Rhys and the main character, Antoinetta, they're referred to as Creole. They're white inhabitants of the island, natives of the island, essentially, in terms of generationally. So they are descended from white settlers to the island. So it's interesting to see the dynamics between races presented in the story, and to see one person's take on how Bertha Mason, Antoinette Mason, Bertha Rochester became the mad woman in the attic. And I thought it was really fascinating and a really interesting insight into mental health as well, and the different attitudes towards it, particularly in the way her mother is treated as well. So yeah, so I read this book really quickly as well. It was only a very short book, but it's one that I do want to reread, maybe parallel read it with Jane Eyre, so I'm going to have to probably get myself my own copy at some point. And finally, on to my 5-star read. So my first 5-star read of the month was another one for my Read Around the World challenge, and that was We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So she is from Nigeria. This was also non-fiction. This is a very short essay. I think it was based on a TED talk that she gave, about what feminism is and why it's important, and how it's not just about promoting women but about promoting equality. And yeah, it was really good. It was only very short. I think it was about 40-50 pages, and it was quite a small little book, and not much to say about it really, apart from that it was excellent and everyone should read it because we should all be feminists. And then finally, my final 5-star read of the month, also my favourite book of the month, was Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. I mentioned on Twitter that Laini Taylor is now an auto-buy author for me. I read Strange to Dreamer and immediately ordered Muse of Nightmares, which I haven't quite got around to yet. And I read Daughter of Smoke and Bone and immediately ordered the rest of the trilogy, so I have a nice box set of them now. And I just loved it. I love her writing. It's so easy to get lost in the worlds that she creates. I really want to go to Prague now. Cannot tell you how much I want to go to Prague, and really excited to carry on with that series. The main character, Karu, is an orphan. She has grown up under the care of Chimera, who are sort of hybrid creatures, not human, part animal, and she finds out they've been at war for centuries, I think, with the Seraphim, who are sort of angelic beings, and she doesn't really know how she fits into all of this, and all she knows is that she has to go and collect teeth for Brimstone, who is also called the Wishmonger, and he gives her wishes in exchange for collecting these teeth, but she doesn't know what the teeth are for. And she's trying to also balance living as normal a life as possible, and then things just go a bit crazy. And with Laini Taylor's books, I think you are served well by going in knowing as little as possible, because they're so difficult to explain that it's really difficult not to give stuff away in explaining them. So love Laini Taylor's writing and I'm really keen to keep reading her book. So that was it. That was all the books I read in October. So it was quite a good reading month for me. Now on to let's do what I'm currently reading at the moment. So I mentioned I've been in a bit of a reading slump. I have actually now finished 2 books this month, which because I'm slightly delayed in filming this because I was away last weekend, so I'm actually really pleased because I didn't think I was going to read anything the rate I was going. So my first book that I'm currently reading, I actually started in October, but I've really sort of been struggling to get into it. I'm really enjoying it, but it's quite hard going. So that's Emily Nation by Alex McKay. So this was our Ninja Book Club pick for October, and actually due to family circumstances, Bex, our book club post, had to cancel our Facebook chat, so we haven't actually talked about it, which is just as well because I'm about a third of the way into it. So this is about Emily, she's an assassin. It's set in a sort of kind of post-apocalyptic future, set all around the west coast of England, which is a lovely part of the world, but not in this book. So she's an assassin. At the start of the novel, she exclusively takes out the bad guys, and then something really horrible happens and she goes off the rails a bit. And the bit of the story I've got to is she's just been pulled back in and is trying to I suppose it's about revenge. She's starting to try to get revenge on the people that hurt her family. So it's really good. It's quite brutal in places. There is violence, but it's sort of after the fact, so you don't necessarily witness the violence, but there are descriptions of the effects of it. So, but I'm really enjoying it so far. Yeah, but it is hard going, so I do have to put it down sometimes and give myself a bit of a break from it because it is a very intense book. My other book that I've just started this morning is actually our Ninja Book Club pick for November, which I'm quite excited about. It's called A Change Is Gonna Come. So this is a collection of short stories and poetry by Black and Middle Eastern writers, I believe, people of colour. I haven't actually started any of the actual stories yet, I've just read the introduction to it, and I think it's going to be a really good collection. And I quite enjoy having short stories on the go while I'm reading novels as well. So yeah, so looking forward to getting stuck into this one in this month. As to what I'm aiming to read for the rest of the month, so it's just been announced there's another round of Tome Topple this month, which is really exciting because I have some very long books that I do want to try and read. So the first of those I've already mentioned, obviously, is Muse of Nightmares, because I loved Strange the Dreamer and I pre-ordered this straight away because I wanted to read it really soon. I do tend to I have to have a couple of books break between books from a series because I don't like to overdo it. I suppose with a duology there was probably less danger of that, but then I did manage to get the lovely sprayed edges edition. So yeah, so this is definitely on my Tome Topple TBR. The other one is also in a series that I want to read for Tome Topple, which is Gemina. This is the second book in the Illuminae Files series. So I really loved Illuminae. I read that in September and I lent it to my dad and he really enjoyed it. So I've got to read this one now so I can lend this one to him because he might get impatient because he doesn't have as many books on his TBR as I do. And I've put Obsidio on my Christmas wish list, so I might drop a few hints that if he buys me that then he can borrow it after I've read it. So yeah, so that's my second book. My third book is a library book because I have not done very well with reading library books so far this month. So that is The Lies of Lamora. This is a fantasy novel. I think it's the first in a trilogy. I've heard really good things about it, so I might try and get onto that one. And then my fourth book I might try and read for Tome Topple because I'm a mood reader, so I don't know what order I'll try and read these. I probably won't manage to read all four of them because they're all chunky and it's only a 2-week readathon. But my fourth book I have is Bring Up the Bodies, which is the sequel to Wolf Hall. I think eventually there's going to be a third one in this series, but I don't know when. So this is about Thomas Cromwell, so he was an advisor to Henry VIII. There is one more book that I might try to get to. So October was a good month for me in terms of feeling like I've made it as a booktuber in some ways. So even though my subscriber count is only growing very, very slowly, 2 things happened that made me feel like actually maybe I am a proper booktuber. The first was that an author got in touch with me to ask if I would review his book, which is quite exciting. And it actually, when I had a look at it, it does sound a sort of book that I do read and do enjoy. And I think he'd seen me review a book that's along maybe a similar theme, so that's why he got in touch specifically. So the book is called Cruel Reality, and the author is C.J. Whitley. This is a sort of dystopian novel. I've seen other reviews that say it has some Hunger Games vibes, but I think it's a bit more, maybe a bit more grown up than Hunger Games, if that's not doing any disservice to Hunger Games, but I don't want to disservice this book by going into it thinking it's going to be like Hunger Games. Basically the concept is a group of people are kidnapped and forced to fight for others' entertainment, I think. So I'm quite intrigued to read that, and I will be doing a full review when I've read it because he was so generous to send it to me for free, so I will let you know what I think of it and whether it's worth going out and getting. And then the other thing that made me feel like a proper booktuber is I was sent an ARC by a publisher, which is very exciting. It's my first ever ARC. So I got a proof copy of The Wolves of Leninsky Prospect by Sarah Armstrong. This is published by Sandstone Press, who are a great small press based in the UK. This one I don't know if I'll get onto this month or in December because I think it releases in January, so I'll aim to have my review of it up in sort of January time. I think there's going to be a blog tour as well for it. So, and this is actually shorter, so I won't be reading this for Tome Topple, but I'm quite intrigued by it. It's to do with a spy. So I don't know much more about it than that, apart from it's set in the Cold War and it's about spies. It sounds really interesting and I'm really excited that it's my first ever proof. So nothing more to say. So that is all the books I read in October and the books I am hoping to read in November. So let me know what you thought of any of those books, if you've read them, or if you've read any that are on my TBR. Let me know if you're taking part in Tome Topple and what books you're aiming to read for that. It'd be good to try and find some buddy reads to do for that as well, because I think that's meant to be helpful in helping you get through those really long books. And if I remember, I'll put the Tome Topple announcement in the description so that you can find out all the details about that. Like the video if you liked it, because that always makes me feel good, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on social media. That information is always going to be in the description box, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!